when we have those needs met, then we know that we are loved, that we have an identity, that we belong, that we feel safe. And when individuals have those needs met, their work to take care of their mental health can be can start and can just go forward. So think about this. Every individual needs to have those needs met. And sometimes it's the families who feel like they don't have those needs met, and sometimes is the person who is struggling with something, with a mental health issues, that does not have those needs met. When I first started to work with addiction, one of the things that I constantly got were family members who would come and say, well, what about me? And that made me think about it, because we constantly focused on, let's understand the addiction. Let's help the families understand their loved one with addiction. And when parents and husbands and wives and sons and daughters came and said, do you understand me and what I go through? That really made me think about, we've got to really provide support for the families. It's not just about the person who is struggling with addiction. It's not just about the person who struggles with anxiety or depression or trauma. It's about all of us as a family, because whatever we are struggling with, addiction or something else, that particular mental health can impact the whole family. So today, also, we're going to think a little bit about how does this approach can be used with families as well. What do families experience? This one is mostly focused on addiction, but think also about other things that you have heard your family members say, because my husband struggles with past trauma, this is what I feel. A lot of fear about what the future will bring, a lot of anxiety, a lot of feelings of sadness and isolation. Depending on what the issue is, sometimes those family members do not even go to meet with other people who are struggling with the same issue because of that stigma. If I am in a particular social circle that addiction is not quite seen as a disease and is seen as, well, you're doing something wrong, then it's very difficult for me as a wife or as a sister, as a daughter, to really seek help, because I don't want to admit to others that there is something going on in my family. So the more the sickness or the illness progresses, the more feelings of isolation and sadness I feel as a family member. So one thing that we can all keep in mind for family members is to help them understand that they are not alone on this particular journey. They can reach out to a therapist, they can reach out to a support group, they can reach out to friends, they can reach out to clergy leaders, they can reach out to teachers who can help them and who can help the family, especially in not feeling like they are alone in this journey, because they are not. When family members struggle with a loved one who is struggling, who is going through addiction, they become hypervigilant. Anything goes through this lens. Anything, I'm going to be hyper. Sometimes defensive and critical, and sometimes withdrawn, especially if the family members are children or wives who are having a difficult time with basically having a difficult time understanding that they too can progress or they can support their family if they are especially into a position that the husband is the one taking care of the finances. The wives are feeling like they cannot say much, because if they can say something, then they are concerned about family finances. So they find themselves into more of a withdrawal position. So that's something to consider, those family dynamics, how addiction or how trauma, how depression impacts our family dynamics. And when members of the family do not feel like they have a good support system, they don't feel like they have a therapist to help them and guide them through those situations, those family dynamics, the withdrawal, the hypervigilance, the defensive or the critical things, they become the new norm. And when they become the new norm, it's not very fun to be in that particular family. People actually find ways to stay away from home, to stay away from their family so they don't have to deal with the criticism. You can see the long hours at the office. You can see just hanging out with friends rather than coming home, because coming home, it's not really that great. So being able to help the family members understand how this particular mental illness has impacted all of us as a family is very important. Okay. In the restoration framework, we're going to talk about those concepts. Love, we talked about love, trust, safety, and forgiveness. Why are they important? That is where we really create, or when we really get that feelings of belonging, when we create that feeling of we are loved, we are accepted. Remember the word accepted, because some of our, especially our kids who are struggling with certain things, or family members who are struggling with addiction, they might know that they are loved, but do they know that they are accepted? Because the behaviors that they are engaging are not seen as appropriate behaviors, even though they know that, yes, I'm a loved family member, but because I do this, I'm not an accepted one. Then love does not really become a concept that they understand. They are going to focus mostly on acceptance. So that's one thing to help the client who is struggling with this particular addiction to understand what does it mean to feel loved, and what does it mean to be accepted. And for the family members, what does it mean to give love, and what does it mean to not accept the behavior, but accept the person, to accept the family member. And that is a difficult concept for a lot of family members, because they really would focus on how is my loved one's behavior impacting me. So immediately they go, it is unacceptable. If it impacts me negatively, it is unacceptable. Can we accept that the person who is engaging in this particular behavior, addiction or something else, is still that loved one, that person who we loved and still love? However, the behaviors that we are focusing on are unacceptable. That's a hard one for a lot of families, but that's something that family members need to understand. We've got also trust and safety. Again, just like love, these are basic concepts that all family members need to have present for them to really start or continue the work of restoring this love and safety and trust. And unless family members, either one of them, family members who are impacted by the disease, or family member who is dealing or struggling with the disease, all of them need to have those particular concepts present. If as a family member, I don't feel trust or safe in my relationship, it's very difficult for me to accept my family member whose behavior are impacting me. The same for if I'm going to focus on addiction, the same for the addict. If the addict doesn't feel safe, doesn't feel accepted, doesn't feel that there is trust in the relationships in the family, it's very difficult for the addict to start working on this part, on taking care of this addiction. So those four concepts, love, trust, safety, and forgiveness, if you could remember those four concepts from our presentation today, and how family members can feel those concepts, that would be important. All right, we've got in our family relationships, we've got balanced and unbalanced relationships. A relationship is balanced when all of those four concepts are there, when people feel loved, safe, trusted. We'll talk a little bit about forgiveness later. But basically, if we want to really consider how balanced is your family, this could be some concept that we could look at. A lot of times in families, even though we don't like to talk about basically that 50-50, right? You give 100% regardless. But a lot of times in those families, they are very much focused on, I only give and I don't get anything in return. You can also see this with clients who are struggling with any type of marital issues, not just addiction. I only give and I don't get anything in return. And when you hear that, or when I hear that, to me is, okay, this relationship is unbalanced and I've got to work into balancing so both people feel like I can give and I also can receive. Now, when I work with couples, I work in the idea that receiving does not really mean sometimes that you are going to receive exactly 100%. You gave 100%, you're going to give 100%. Or you gave a specific item and you are not going to get the same item in return, because giving and receiving in marriages, in families, in any relationship, even with your students, is different. So as long as the person who is giving gives whatever that person thinks it's important, and there is an agreement about whatever I give, I know that my spouse, my husband, my mother, my brother will appreciate what I'm giving. There is not much into, well, I gave 50% or I gave this and I did not get in return what I wanted. So there needs to be also some agreement between what I'm giving, is that helpful to the other person. One time I did a family therapy session with a family of about, oh my gosh, it was about 12 people who came to help the client that I was seeing. And it was one of my most favorite sessions. Everybody in the family was very supportive of this lady that I'm working with. And without asking her, without having an agreement about what is it that you need from us, everybody in the family, there was mother, father, daughters, their husbands, so there were quite a bit of people, but they were all very committed and came and said to this lady, this is how I'm going to help you. And she graciously enough listened to all of them, and when they were finishing with their offerings, she said, I appreciate your help, but that is not what I need. There was not any agreement between what helps me, and this was actually an addiction case. There needs to be an agreement about what I receive and what I give, even though it's not going to be 50-50% or 100%, however the family members need to see. They need to understand that what I give, it should be received with gratefulness on the other person. It's something that the other person needs rather than whatever I think the other person needs. When I feel that I am loved and nurtured, when I know that family members care about me and they give me time, basically, I also give back respect. I give back companionship. Whatever I give, I also get. So basically, there are things that when love and safety and trust are present, there are things that we are entitled to, and there are things that we can expect or that we have an obligation to give. And here you've got some examples. I am entitled to be loved in the family. I am entitled to have nurturing and spending time with my family members. I am entitled to the care that family members can give me. But because I'm also entitled to these particular concepts, I'm also obligated to give back what my family members deserve. I need to give back respect, companionship. I need to give back what my family can value and can appreciate. Okay, how do we store love? How do we create this balanced relationship? A couple of things to understand is that in family relationships, when a mental health issue, a disease is going on, we've got a pain cycle that is going through. And unless we identify that there is a pain cycle, it's usually that emotional pain. And unless we understand how has this pain cycle impacted us, we cannot really go through that process of healing. Why? That pain cycle will be repeating. We constantly are going to say, you're hurting me. I feel hurt by whatever is going on, but we have not understood or we have not recognized the pain cycle. So being able to help the family members understand this pain cycle and replace it with a love cycle can be very helpful. And we'll talk a little bit about this. As we understand the pain cycle, one of the things that we can do with our family members is to also recognize and understand the truth. And what I mean by that is when a family member has been impacted by addiction, the identity of that particular person has changed. He's an addict. That's the new identity. But really the truth is that that person who struggles with addiction is more than just an addict. He's a son, he's a father, she is a mother, she's a friend, she is a capable person. So there is more than just he or she is an addict. When we help the family members understand and find the truth between each particular family member that struggles with a disease or a mental health condition that has impacted the family significantly, when we really understand the truth about that particular family member, and when we practice that truth, it really opens up for the cycle of love to replace the cycle of pain. All right, so when we have a violation of love and trust, we get that pain cycle going on in our relationship. So family members think about a person with addiction, think about a person who has struggled with trauma for a long time and is not capable to take care of themselves. Think about that kiddo who is struggling with gender identity. What they are feeling is, I feel unloved, I feel unsafe. Regardless of we saying, well, we love you and I appreciate you and we're in this together. The moment, remember how we talked about the acceptance? We love the person, but we don't accept the differences. We don't accept them or we don't accept their behaviors. The family members who are struggling with an addiction or with another mental health issue, they're going to focus on, I feel unloved. They know that their behaviors are not accepted by the rest of the family, but they're going to put an equal sign between my behavior is not accepted and I am not accepted. To them, it is, if my family member accepts my behavior, that means they accept me for who I am. That's not quite the same, and they need to understand that. But while the family members while the person who is struggling with a mental illness is focusing on, I feel unloved, I feel unsafe, how are they going to cope with? They're going to cope with blaming others. It's your fault that I am struggling with this. If you could accept me, everything would be fine. Because you don't accept me, then I go into shaming myself. So you could see how when family members do not feel loved, when they don't feel safe, when they experience that violation of what is that they consider as, I am entitled to love and safety at home. So when they experience that violation of love, they cope with the situation in ways that the rest of us, family members who are not struggling with addiction or mental health issues, we are considering this as negative ways of coping. So we are blaming others, or we are shaming ourselves, or we are acting on ways that are completely unsafe. But what can happen if we actually replace this concept, a violation of love and trust, or the pain cycle, with the love cycle? Okay, pain cycle. I feel unloved, I feel unwanted, I feel like a failure, I feel like a disappointment to my family. I brought a lot of shame to my family. I see my wife, my husband as controlling me, trying to control whatever I do and whatever I see. So I get angry and I cope with trying to control them, trying to be angrier, trying to blame them or blame any other person for the behaviors that I'm struggling with. Any questions so far, you guys? Okay, I'll keep moving then. But feel free to unmute your microphones or to send us a message through chat if you have any questions. Okay, this pain cycle, what do we need to do about this? We've got to help that person, that family member who is struggling with addiction, with gender identity, with something else, with a mental illness. We've got to understand how to create those human connections, human connection with the violator. Now, the terms that are used in here are a little bit strong. The violator is the person who has violated love and safety. So if let's say, if my husband is using, I'm making this up, you guys, if my husband is using substances and he is struggling with addiction, and I do not accept this addiction and I become an unsupportive wife, I am the violator. It's difficult for some family members to really take the term violator, because they would say, after all I have done for my husband, now you see me as me being the violator. It can, yes, the person who has violated giving love and safety, it's me, because I have not created that particular safe environment for my husband to really work on the addiction. So I've got to really work, if I'm the therapist, I've got to work with this wife and with the husband. The husband is to create a connection now with the wife, who is the violator of love. When the wife recognizes that she has been withdrawing love, she has been violating, or she has created an unsafe environment, then the blame and shame can reduce quite a bit. I will tell you this though, it's prepare on a session or two on this particular concept. It's very difficult for family members to really accept the term violator, because remember how I said to you at the very beginning of the presentation, a lot of those families who struggled with a loved one who went through addiction came and said, what about me? You're focusing on the addict. What about me? And now to turn the table to them and say, well, you are the violator, it's very difficult for them. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done with, what does that mean? Maybe the violator is not the right term, who knows? That's the term that Terry Hargrave uses, so I'm using his term as well. If the families have a difficult time with that particular concept or with this particular term, you can come to an agreement with using another term. But when the idea behind this is to recognize that we have not created a safe environment for the family member to really start working on the mental illness, the disease that he or she is experiencing. Okay, we've got to work on identifying, basically helping that client increase awareness of the pain that he's feeling or she is feeling. And also, so if we're going to take this example, so husband and wife, husband struggling with addiction, both husband and wife need to have that increased awareness about, the wife needs to understand the pain cycle that her husband is experiencing. And the husband needs to also be able to verbalize to his wife the pain cycle that he has felt because the wife has not been providing the support and the love and the trust. And after we have come to those agreements that we have recognized the pain cycle, we have recognized who is the violator of love and safety and how. And we also need to do a little bit of shame control in here, because you don't want the wife to say, after all I've done, you also are calling me the violator of love. You don't want her to withdraw. You need to help her really understand, what does it mean? And how has she experienced it, or how has she demonstrated this, violation of love? When you withdraw from the relationship, that can be actually a violation of love. Even a simple thing as withdrawing, a simple thing as, I'd rather stay at my office than come home to just deal with my husband's drinking. That withdrawal can be a violation of love. Now you're going to say, well, how do we work with this particular incident? Yes, she doesn't want to come home. Why does she have to come home and deal with the husband's yelling and probably physical abuse if the situation becomes worse? At this point, you are just recognizing, at this point, you are just increasing awareness about how does this pain cycle dances around us? How does the wife experiences it, and how does the husband experiences it? And then The third, basically, after you're increasing awareness, you're going to work with how can we move out from this particular negative pain cycle? How do we replace this pain cycle that has been present for you for so long? How do we replace it with a love cycle? So that's the beauty of this. It's not just, okay, we're labeling people, but the idea behind this is to help both couples or family members, whoever you have, to help them recognize this pain cycle, it's not helping us. We've got to replace it with the love cycle. Finding the wiser and future self. This is, did I skip a page?
Actually, we have a question in the chat. So Anthony says NA and AA teach that identifying as an addict is essential to, and perhaps the most honest thing we have said in years. Are you saying other schemas or more, let's see, sorry. Are you saying other schemas are more or less equal to our schema as addicts? How would you recommend incorporating an addicted schema along with the myriad aspects of our personality?
Joseph, could you, I did not quite understand, is the person asking that basically the title addict should stay there? I'm not saying that we should take away the label, because we need to talk about the responsibility and the accountability. I'm not saying that we should take away the label, but I'm not quite sure that I understood the question.
I don't know. Anthony, do you have access to a microphone? You can.
I do. I'm just saying incorporating the safest way to incorporate that aspect of their personality as an addict without labeling them as an addict only. But I see here in finding the wiser and future self, you are answering that question as we go. So perfect. Thank you very much.
Actually, Anthony, why don't you, since you had the question, you see the slide, help us understand how are you understanding or how you are applying this slide to your work?
In navigating our future selves, we have to invest in our values and beliefs.
Yes.
And seeing this in a sober state, identifying these values and beliefs and investing in those for our future in these particular aspects of our personality, I think is the best way to navigate ourselves away from addiction, is essentially distract ourselves from that lifestyle while maintaining the safety of having that title, knowing that I'm an addict, so I have to be careful.
Correct. Absolutely. I agree with you. And if I'm an addict, I'm an addict. I'm not saying that we should take away that. And I really like your explanation. Yes, we've got to steer away from the behaviors that actually maintain the pain cycle and exacerbate the addiction. But at the same time, the addict, the family member who is struggling with addiction needs to be held accountable. How can we find that wiser and future self? There are some questions that I have in here, and you've got to really see if those questions work for you. But can you see yourself in a sober state, and what made the difference? If an addict who is really deep into addiction today, can that person see themselves? What can make the difference? Because if they can, then you know how to start or what to start working with them. To empower them by saying, how did you do it? Who helped you? Who was supportive of you? These particular questions will give you ideas, will give the client ideas about how the road to recovery looks like. Who are the people? Well, what do you need to do first? And who are the people who can actually be there present for you? I really like this. What do you wish others can see in you now? This question talks a lot about the shame and the guilt that they have. And when you ask the addict this question, what do you wish your wife, your husband, your son, your daughter see in you right now? They will talk about themselves, their personal character, their core. They will talk also about the addict, and sometimes they are going to focus only on the shame and the guilt that they feel. but a lot of them do want to be seen as who they are, that they are good fathers, good mothers, that they are good people who are struggling with that addiction. And that is something too, I love that question, because when I ask them, what do you wish others can see in you? Then the next question from me would be, how can you make sure that they see that in you? To me, it opens up the idea of, what do you need to do right now? How can you work with you and your support system to actually change certain things about your behavior? So we all have our wiser and future self. Can we see it? Do some of our clients have the capability to see what their future self is looking like? And sometimes it's hard to see, where are you going to be in 3 months, in 1 year, in 5 years? But deep down, that will be also their dream, their desires. In 2 years, I would like to. In 1 year, I'd like to. In 3 months, I'd like to. And most of them do talk about fulfilling job and family responsibilities. They want to be productive people who can give back to their family, to their work, to their employers, and to their community. Okay, let's start with.
Sorry to interrupt. So Sue Ellen is asking, what about when people push away their biggest supporter to avoid continuing hurting them?
That's a great question. And you're going to see this pushing. If the pushing is still happening, that means the client is still into the pain cycle. Awareness of that pain cycle. Again, why? What's going on? Why are you pushing? You're pushing them to not hurt them. But that means that the person is still, somebody in the relationship is still into the pain cycle, and the pain cycle has not been replaced with the love cycle. So that means you just got more work into increasing that awareness of both, everybody in the family about the pain cycle. Okay. This is one of my most favorite techniques when it comes to using of this particular approach. And you can use this. I've used this with trauma and addiction. It's a wonderful technique. Basically, you are doing emotion regulation, and you are doing empowerment for this particular patient. How does this technique works? You don't have to have screens, so think about imaginary screens, but you've got a patient, you've got a client that is looking at his or her life. Basically, you're saying, look at the screen in front of you, imaginary screen in front of you, and see your life go by. You can give specific instructions about which particular life you want the client to see, or you can just leave it general and let the client go wherever they want to go. Usually, if you have a client with addiction, they will go to the years that have been the most painful for them or their families. If you have a client who is struggling with trauma, they will go to the years of the abuse. So you ask your clients to just see and describe you what they are seeing in that particular screen. And you're just going to let them talk. They might cry at that time. They might get emotionally dysregulated. They might be triggered, and that's okay, because they are actually seeing their most painful moments go by. They are reliving their most painful moments go by. Then after you have, this is their front screen. Basically, what you're going to do after. You're going to say to them, after they have expressed themselves, they need to take this front screen and put it on the side. And in the front screen now, basically the front screen becomes another one. The side screen will be the pain screen. The client now needs to look at the front screen, which is their new life, which is their new self, which is their truer self, which is their future self. They can only look at or turn to the side screen only if they feel the pain. So basically your side now becomes a reminder of pain, and the front screen becomes a reminder of who they are in the future. So now in the future, they are going to notice things like, I am taking care of my family. I'm holding a job. I'm sober, I'm strong, I'm doing the best I can, I spend time with my family. So you're going to see the difference between two screens. One screen that is in the side now, it's the pain or the pain cycle, or how they impacted themselves, how the addiction impacted themselves and their families, and the front screen becomes your empowerment. And how you're also going to help empower that particular client is by asking certain questions like, how did you make it? How did you survive? How did you become sober? What are some of your strongest points? Who helped you? How did you learn to be strong? So any question that you might ask to really help the client start thinking that my pain is behind me now. It's on the side really, but my pain is not in front of me. I don't have to focus on that. So the side and the front screen also has this meaning that, where do you want to focus your life? You are here in the middle of addiction. Do you want to focus ahead of you, ahead of your life? Or do you kind of want to stay back to where the pain, where the difficulties were? So to really help the client also understand that it's a much better place, a much better feeling, a much better way of functioning and living my life if I focus on my front screen, which is my future self coming, my future life with my family coming. So you are really helping the client understand, what could my future be if I am not into the addiction? What could my future be if I've taken care of my mental health? What could my future be if I'm in a much healthier place? How do my work relationships, family relationships, my own well-being look like? And then you start quite a bit of discussions about, how do we do this? How do we get to do all of those wonderful things that you can see in your front screen? Any question? Okay, all right. Let's go to the peace cycle. The peace cycle has to do with the truth about each one of us as family members. Each one of us has individuals who are struggling with depression, anxiety, addiction, trauma. Basically, the peace cycle has to do with how we can empower ourselves, how we can empower our clients, how we can empower our whole family, basically the whole family that we work with. The idea is, how can everyone in the family feel loved and empowered? How can everyone in the family feel worthy and enough, even though they are still working on their addiction, even though they are still working on their gender identity, even though they are still working on their trauma? Because when the peace cycle is there, what really is happening is that family members are feeling loved and accepted. And when they feel loved and accepted, then they are more open and they're more willing to do the work that they need to do. When they know that they are valued, they can actually are more willing to open up and to be able to work, to continue their work with their addiction or something else. As part of the peace cycle, we have to work also with the last concept of this particular approach, which is forgiveness. And a lot of times, this is a very difficult concept to understand or to practice. Family members say, I can't forgive because I have been hurt so much. And that's difficult to forgive. It's not just about let go and let's just forgive the person who has caused so much pain to you or to other family members. Forgiveness is not really much about letting go, as much as it is putting back. And what I mean by that putting back is, think about if you were to have a little bottle, and every good deed that you do, every good thing that you do in your relationship with yourself, your family, other people, you put a little drop in that particular bottle. And you know how much goodness you have done based on how many drops you have in that little bottle. Well, forgiveness is kind of similar. You put back into that particular bottle, and you put back by restoring that love and trustworthiness to the relationship, by giving the families, the individuals, a new possibility. And that's why this approach is really called the restoration approach, because you are restoring the difficult pain cycle. You're restoring it with the peace cycle. You are working with forgiveness, and when love and safety and forgiveness are present, people feel more willing. People feel more capable, more empowered to do their work. So for forgiveness, what Harry Hargrave says, he says that there are several stations. He calls them stations because they are not stages, they are stations. And you can go from one station to the other sometimes. But your insight is your regular, basically helping the victim understand what has been done and how can the victim stop the victimizer from continuing those violations. Now, when it comes to violations, let's say we took the example of if I had a husband who is struggling with depression, both husband and wife can be the violators. Because for a husband who is struggling with addiction, he also violates the love and the safety and the trust for the wife, just like the wife violates love and compassion for the husband who is struggling with addiction. So both really need to understand that both have been hurt by the addiction, and we have to understand how both have been hurt by the addiction, and how we can stop the victimizer from continuing those violations. That's why this is such a good approach to use with families, because it's not about you as an addict have hurt me. It's also the whole family members being aware of how we have engaged in violating love and safety, and for them to understand how we can actually break those patterns so we can actually focus on the forgiveness. I like the idea of understanding, or the station of understanding, to really help the victim understand that to understand where the victimizer was at the time that the victimizer completed basically the victimization. Even though somebody can victimize that love and safety, we've got to understand at what point of history, at what point of development, what were the limitations of the victimizers, because sometimes that violation of love and peace is not done on purpose. It's done because whoever is the violator, they are hurting so much inside that in order for them to take care of themselves, one way for them to take care of themselves is to withdraw certain concepts like love and safety and trust, which becomes the violator of that love and safety. But it is also done because at that particular time, that was the best that they could do. So really to help the clients understand that these violations sometimes are not done on purpose, but they are done to really as a way for us to take care of ourselves. And the next station will be giving the opportunity for compensation. It really helps the victim and the victimizer rebuild that trusting relationship. What do we do? What do we need to do differently to bring love and safety in our relationship? And then we focus on forgiveness. When we talk about forgiveness, I'd like you to think about salvage work. Sometimes we can save everything in a relationship, especially when things have been going on. Think about trauma. When the abuse has happened when I was 6-year-old and I'm 55 now, I can't really change a lot of things. It has happened a long time ago. Sometimes people die, sometimes people are not available. But think about salvage work. If you could save something from the relationship, some good salvage work right now can lead to a good, healthy relationship, or simply mental health 20 years from now. So as we work with forgiveness, not everything, not 100% of the relationship or the person or anything think of. We've got so think about salvage work. If you could just salvage one thing, one part of the relationship, that would be good. Okay, with forgiveness. In order for us to forgive, we also have to be able to be willing to take the risk. No forgiveness can come from not being able to take the risk. Taking that risk means being willing to go through some very difficult emotional time. For some people, it means to go back and meet with the abuser. For some people, it means to go back and revisit that emotional pain. So, but unless people are willing to take some risk, not much forgiveness can be happening. So, and as you are working with clients into the forgiveness, basically you've got to do several sessions with how to support them, how to basically identify what are some of the risks that I'm going to take. How am I going to respond to those certain risks? What if my efforts to restore that forgiveness are not reciprocated by the other person? So there is a lot of work that therapists can do with this restoration of forgiveness. Yeah. In order for people to forgive, there needs to be certain things. There needs to be an agreement on what was the damage. Unless an agreement has been made, it's very difficult to forgive. I had a client one time that as she worked on forgiveness, she met with the abuser, who was her father, actually, who sexually abused her. I'm going to trauma now rather than addiction. But her father's response was extremely hurtful and painful. He said, "Oh, it was years ago. You were only 6. You didn't even understand what was going on at that time." She could not forgive, and basically for a good reason. The agreement between her and the father about what was the damage done was not there. She was not validated for her emotional pain. She could not forgive. And our work in therapy with her was to really understand how she could move on. So it was very little salvage done on that particular relationship. Most of the salvage was into, you have done what you could and the other person did not reciprocate. How can you actually move on? But there was not much of that forgiveness. I think his name was Anthony, when he made a comment about the addict and the responsibility. There needs to, with the agreement on the damage, also there needs to be an acknowledgement of responsibility. I am the one who stole money from you. I am the one, and my behavior is the one that left our whole family without a home. So I've got to recognize that if I'm the addict, I'm the one. I need to take responsibility of the damage that I've done. And I need to really understand, or I have to make sure that what I'm offering, or the responsibility or the accountability that I'm offering, is also enough for my family members. Because I might also think about only part of my behavior as being a behavior that I need to take accountability. My family member might bring up more things that I had not been aware, and I have to recognize and take accountability for those particular behavior. As we work on forgiveness, it has to be a realistic forgiveness. It's not about, well, I'm just going to say I forgive. And it's not about asking the client to forgive to the extent that is not realistic for her or for him. It has to be something that it can also be doable. But again, the willingness to take the risk. Without taking that risk, it's very difficult to engage in the process of forgiveness. Okay. How do you guys respond to this question? How can compassion for a victimizer contribute to trauma or potential harm for a victim?
Can I answer this? Is that okay?
Thank you.
I think it kind of, it can come off as minimizing the harm or the effect that the victimizer has had on the victim.
Sure. Yes. Yeah, minimizing the harm. And if the harm is minimized, then we don't have an agreement about what damage was done. There is not much accountability. So that's excellent. Yep. Thank you. Any other ideas?
Sorry to interrupt. I think this is fascinating, and I think we'll keep going for those who are still interested. But I just wanted to mention I did place the link to the evaluation in the chat. If you are looking to receive CE credit for this class, please click on that link. There is a class code that you will need to use. That's addiction124. I placed that also in the chat. And then again, if you run into any issues accessing the evaluation form, or you're unable to open it or for any reason, just email me at joseph.turk@uhsinc.com. I placed that email in the chat as well. And also, we've been recording this class. So if you want to go back and maybe listen to one of the techniques or the concepts that we discussed, feel free to do that too. I will include a link to our YouTube channel in the chat as well. And go ahead, Bielsa, unless anyone else had any other questions at this time.
I know that we are out of time, but for those who are interested, I'd like to have just a short discussion about this particular question, because it's really one of the main concerns that when we talk about forgiveness, it comes up. It comes up as a dilemma. How do I work with the victimizer without really hurting the victim?
It also seems like it would enable the victimizer for future harm.
Yes, and especially if I'm talking about how can I restore love and safety, right? It seems like at times I'm enabling him, even though you can continue to do what you are doing in your cycle of addiction. I'm the one to continue to give you love and support. So yes, which comes again to that particular intervention, an agreement of what was the damage done needs to happen, an agreement of who is accountable, who is responsible for what, and how can we take accountability? Yes. Well, that's wonderful. For those of you who are still in here, do you guys have any question or any ideas about what has been helpful to you? Have you been, are you familiar with this particular approach? I heard Terry Hargrave in a conference. I've met him actually. I really enjoy this approach. It's working great for trauma. He's a great researcher, but what are some of your thoughts? Do you see yourself using this approach or not?
As soon as I learn more about it, yes.
Yes, absolutely. With 1 hour, you can't really, this is not just a great presentation of the approach, so to speak. You don't, this is he has written some books on this, but this requires 2 days, at least 2 days of presentation for us to really understand how can you use this approach. Any other feedback? Have you used any of those techniques? Have you used the front and side screen with your clients? Probably not. Okay. Do you guys have any questions for me or Joseph?
Going back to that question, you asked us our thoughts on the question, and it does seem like not only would it enable, but also it seems like it would be 2 people on one side and then the victim on the other.
When you say 2 people, are you counting the therapist?
Yes.
You're going to do back and forth, because you're going to take some, in one session, it really depends on who you are focusing, but yes, you are going to be at times 2 people, you are joining with the client or with the victim, and then another time you're going to join the victimizer. Because even the victimizer needs to have the support from you to understand the damage that the victim. So if I'm me and my husband in the session and you are our therapist, you've got to join me so I can express what damage my husband has done to me and how he can take responsibility and how he can actually restore some of that peace and safety for me. Then you're going to join him. He's the addict. You're going to join him in helping him recognize how he can, what is the damage that I've created for him? How can I make sure that he feels also safe? And then you're going to be in the middle and saying, how can the 2 of you, husband and wife, create now the love cycle or the peace cycle? So you're going to be a yo-yo between husband, wife, and then the relationship.
Thank you so much. That would be so difficult in maintaining that objectivity in this.
Yep. You can also do one session at a time, but there needs to be the agreement that on this session, I'm going to work only with your wife. And then the next session, I'm going to work only with you, husband. So as we are going to work with each other, remember that our goal is to establish the peace cycle. So you are entitled to express yourself into what emotional pain you are feeling right now, but you have to recognize the pain cycle for your wife. You have to recognize what pain she has experienced in order for you to actually turn this pain to a love cycle. But these are, oh boy, these are difficult sessions. One thing that you need to keep in mind is that they won't be pleasant sessions unless both spouses or whoever is in the family are willing to participate in therapy.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about like an Al-Anon or a codependent type approach where the wife or whichever person does not have addiction disease has been told over and over again, you didn't cause this, you can't control it, and you can't fix it. So that's just kind of been a mantra that I like this because there is some interplay where we hurt each other over time.
Yeah.
But I'm anticipating a big hurdle.
There might be a big hurdle because if the message if I'm the addict and the message is, I cannot control this, I'm an addict, so what? Then it's very difficult for me to understand, oh, I've hurt them. I really have hurt them, and I have to take accountability. You're right. I had a couple, I worked in a methadone clinic years ago, and I had a couple, one of my favorite couples actually. The husband was receiving his methadone, so he was actually pretty good. He was doing very well. He was an addict since the first baby was born. So all of those years, he was gone from the family. The wife was very stuck with, where were you? Our oldest son is 18 right now. Where were you throughout all these 18 years? And she could not recognize, she could not accept that her husband wanted to be a good father now. She wanted him to repay for all of those 18 years, and whatever he came up with, she could not accept it. It was very difficult. We actually talked about how can the husband repay you? And everything that we came up with, she would not accept it. It came to, the wife was not willing. The husband was willing, but the wife was not willing. The agreement was done that he had hurt the family. He has not been a present father or husband. That agreement was done, but it was not a good agreement because it was only in the part of the therapist and the father or the husband. The wife could not take us. So a lot of work on this particular case went into helping the wife to understand what else can your husband do. Can you give him an idea of how can he repay the family? she knew that he could not repay because it was things, remember the salvage work? He could not fix that 18 years that was gone. There is no way for him to do that. So we were working on salvage, just take what we've got right now, but she could not accept the salvage work. She wanted a full, what's the word I'm looking for? When I think of salvage, I think of a ship that is being destroyed in the sea. Salvage for me would be take a cushion so you can float and go. Let the ship sink. She wanted the full repair of the ship, even though the ship was sinking. So
Tough stuff.
you know, it's a really, this approach, Lisa, it works great with trauma. But it's again that salvage work that gets people stuck because they want the full, they want full recovery rather than salvage. And you cannot blame them. I mean, even with this father, 18 years of being absent, you cannot just come right now. That was her thing. You cannot just come right now and be a father and be a husband. Where were you? So it's difficult.
Yeah, any other questions? Any other comments that anyone had? For those who have asked, if you're still listening, we will be sending out the certificates later this week. So go ahead and get those evaluations in. And again, I've already had a few responses. Some individuals are unable to access the evaluation, and that's fine. I can try to email that to you or send it to a different email if you're behind a firewall. There's a few things we can try. And then again, we mentioned that we're recording this. So if you want to go back and review any of the techniques that we also discussed, I would suggest doing that. You can find us on our YouTube channel. And when I send out the certificates, I'll also be including a link to that YouTube channel too. We have previous classes there too that you might want to look into too, with a wide array of topics. All right, any other comments or questions before we end today? So we got some really great comments. Well, thank you, Dilsa, for your time. This has been a fascinating topic, and hopefully we can start implementing some of the techniques that we discussed today. And I find this fascinating. It's a difficult subject, but it's also rewarding when you start seeing successes of time well spent in implementing a lot of these techniques.
Okay, thank you all.
All right, bye everyone.